Hi, welcome back to the Suburban Garage Workshop. Today, we're going to build this Infeed table, and we're going to show you what this Infeed table adds to our tool cart. This thing bolts on, it's easy to build, and you could have this done in a couple of hours. So let's get at it.
An infeed table provides two things. One, infeed support for any of the material you're pushing through the saw. And two, it extends your miter slot. And by extending your miter slot, you can now cut wider boards. So you see here in this case, I'm trying to cut this wide board, but because this Dewalt job site saw isn't very wide, I can't cut very wide boards because there's no support for the miter gauge. So what we're going to build is this infeed table. Now this infeed table is going to bolt onto my tool cart that I've been working on, but you could probably adapt a similar design to virtually any saw that you have. Okay, our first task here is to cut down sheet goods. In this case, I'm first cutting down melamine, and then I'm actually going to cut down the plywood base. In this case, I'm going to recycle some plywood that was my old outfeed table, and I'll just knock off those little support legs that are on there. After knocking off those support legs, I need to clean up the glue that was left behind. So I'm running it through the planer here. And I've got a lot of questions of people saying, how can you use the planer being that low? Well, it's pretty easy because you feed it through one side, you walk around and grab it out the other side. It's pretty much like using it normally, it's just a little bit lower. Next, I'm just going to cut down the other pieces. So this is the legs that go up against the workbench, and then I need to cut the pieces that I'm going to build my gussets out of. They're basically the diagonal pieces. Next, I'm going to go over to the miter saw, and I'm going to cut everything to length. So this goes pretty quickly. Okay, and over to the miter saw, I'm going to set this to 45 degrees. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut that, cut the diagonal pieces at 45 degrees right down the middle. Here I'm using basically a push block in my hand to hold it in place and drive it through the blade. Next, I'm going to go ahead and assemble these pieces. So I'm using that one piece as a spacer to move the leg about 3/4 of an inch up. So I'm just going to glue and screw this. Looking back on this, I probably should have brad nailed it in place first. It would have helped hold everything in alignment so I wasn't fighting with it to get the screws in. But that's what we do. Next, I'm going to go ahead and make some notches here. I need to notch out to give a relief. In this case, it's not exact measurements, but it's about 3/4 by 3/4. I'm just cutting a little square out of the corner, and that gives a little bit of extra clearance for that sliding mechanism on the saw. Next, I'm going to go ahead and clamp these in place. And the reason I'm doing this is so I can drill the holes where the attachment points are going to be. So I'm going to clamp these in place. And you see atop of that, I put a little spacer jig that kind of mimics the plywood and melamine above, so I can use that to get the exact placement over the top. And then I'm going to drill through, in this case with a 5/16 hole, and I'm going to go all the way through into the cart, and then just push the knob in place for now. We'll put the inserts in later. And I'm going to repeat that on the other side. So I'm going to use my little spacer at the top to get the top measurement correct, and then I'm going to drill through with a 5/16 bit, and then push the knob in place. Now with that in place, I can go ahead and lay my plywood underlayment in place, and then I can start to get some measurements. I'm going to have to cut this down a little bit because I need to cut around all that sliding assembly on the saw. So here I'm going ahead and getting a measurement, and it's like, I don't know, 2 1/4, 2 5/8, something like that. I can't remember exactly. But I'm getting some measurements here. Your saw may differ, so you need to measure this off your saw. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim that board down a little bit because I cut it at 10 inches, but it doesn't need to be 10 inches. And I didn't know until I got this far how exactly where it needed to be. So I cut that piece down, and then I can lay it in place. Now I'm going to take my melamine sheet and put it in place and start kind of figuring out where I need to cut this piece. And I've kind of marked it with some tape. Sorry, I didn't realize my camera wasn't recording when I was doing the measurement. But what I'm doing is I'm just going to make a cutout of this, and then I'm going to finish it with the Japanese pull saw, and you'll see when I install it in place what I'm doing here. So what you'll see here is I've notched it so that sliding mechanism can go right up to the blade without any interference on the right hand side. And I also need to basically make and cut out that corner where it goes around the table. So here you can see the melamine now is cut out so it's flush against the saw where the miter slot is. The base doesn't need to be that far, but it needs to cut around. Next, I need to basically cut a relief. Now, I should have done this before I made any of those cutouts, but I didn't realize I needed this relief until after I had already done those other cutouts. So you should really do this ahead of time. You know, I was kind of holding it there, a little dangerous. You probably could have done this with a router, and I should have done it, like I said, before I made those other cuts, so it was a nice flat board I'm pushing through, but, you know, live and learn. Okay, with that cut out, I'm going to go through and use a pin nailer to pin nail this exactly into place so it doesn't move when I go ahead and drill and screw it for the actual screws. They're going to hold it in place. I'm not using any glue here. It's not needed. And also, in case I want to make adjustments or anything later, I can take it apart. So in this case, I'm pre-drilling the screw holes. Go ahead and drill it down. Fairly simple. Okay, with that drilled in place, now I can put our melamine in place and I can get it all lined up. Don't worry, you can always trim the edges later if they don't line up. But you want it lined to that, as flat to the saw as you possibly can get it. And then I'm going to go around and clamp it in place so it doesn't shift on me when I'm drilling the screws from below. And you'll see it here in just a moment. Okay, from underneath now, I'm just going to go ahead and pre-drill and screw. So I put a couple screws in place just to hold it, and then I'll go around and put all the other ones in place. And then I can remove the clamps. Okay, so I took a piece of melamine, and it fits perfectly in the Dewalt miter slot. And what I did is I cut a notch on it, so I could use this as a spacer to get everything lined up exactly where I want it and make some marks on it. Next, using some more scrap, I'm going to use these as edge guides, and I'm going to clamp these into place on both sides of that slot, using my melamine spacer to make sure the slot is perfectly the right width. And then I'm going to come in with my trim router and cut a dado to the same length or same depth that matches my table saw. And once I'm done that, I can go ahead and remove these boards. Okay, next I've removed the table, and I need to install these brass inserts. So I need to increase the hole depth from the 5/16 hole we drilled initially up to a 1/2 inch. And I'm doing this in steps, so I'm kind of not going directly from 5/16 to 1/2, but I'm putting some intercepts in the middle. And then I basically screw the inserts into place. And with that, I can reinstall the table. So the table kind of goes in place, and then we use our knobs to basically just put it into place. If you need to, you can elongate the holes on the Infeed table to provide some adjustment for alignment. So here you can see the miter gauge now slides easily back and forth, and we've increased our cut capacity. So here I can cut that same long board that I couldn't cut before. Nice clean cut. So this basically is giving us the Infeed capacity of a cabinet saw now, all with this simple little Infeed table that's easily removed.
And there we go. This was an easy project that we could do in a few hours, and it completely triples the capacity for being able to cross-cut boards. So that whether you're using a miter gauge like I'm using, or you've got a cross-cut sled, this just gives you so much more capability to cut larger, or I should say wider boards when you're cross-cutting them. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, give me a like. If you've got a comment, give me a comment. I've got some other ideas for this modular workbench, and hopefully we'll be able to add on to it and really turn this into a platform that we can really expand on in the future. All right, see you next time. Get out in the garage and build something. Thanks. Bye.